he's kind of, we went walking yesterday and it was like, we're back to pulling and stuff. So.
Oh, okay.
But
in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Okay.
So last night, so he's had 3 days of just being able to run around in the forest.
Oh, sure.
And then trying to go back to walking.
Right.
I think it was just a reminder though. I mean, this morning he was finding it. So.
Yeah, so when it comes to stuff like that, that's not uncommon. Like,
Okay.
it happens all the time.
Okay.
So like for instance, let's say you gave Gilmore to someone who didn't reinforce training to watch him for like a week. Expect that you would come back and he'd be a bit loose.
Okay.
But the moment remote kicks in, boom,
We're back at it.
they just come, it does register right away.
Okay.
I've had people even like have to like not train the dog for months and then come back to revisit it. 15 minutes, everything comes back.
Okay.
So that's one of the great things about remote is that they don't, it's like riding a bike, they don't forget it. It's not gonna be perfect, but you're gonna have a good like 80-90% chunk of it like right off the bat. And then it's just like reaffirming like this is current and stuff.
Okay.
So that's not a problem. I do always suggest, if possible, like I know it's like maybe a forest preserve where it's nice and open, is I'll practice both.
Okay.
Right? Where I practice tight structure, but at the same time I give the break, and you start to balance things out so then you don't even have to worry about the regression.
Okay.
Because this device does give you up to off-leash level control. So like let's say you're at a forest preserve where he's off-leash and you're like already not worried about him running away. I'm like, cool, I can actually even practice no leash walking now because I'm not worried about him running away. And you kind of get used to that. I love walking my guys off leash. Granted, I haven't done it in a long time. I even have barely come leashes with them. But it's really cool to have, like when you're walking and you can call them in, just have that nice tight heel, no leash.
Yeah.
And then if you do that, do make sure that you come to a stop first. Get that sit before you give the release. Because some people will just walk and release, and then you create the habit of he'll just like presumably release himself thinking that you were going to do so while you're moving. That creates a potential problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, anything else?
No, Monday, Tuesday, we were doing much more, instead of like taking him off the sidewalk from another dog coming in, we would sit. And he was still reactive, but I bumped it up to like a 25 and just...
225?
He would, I bumped it up to 25. So
and what's your number now?
16 is what
so
he
you
was
went up 9
walking
levels.
this week.
Gotcha.
And he would give the yelp, but...
Would he still be reactive?
No.
Okay, so you jip and jump back.
Yep.
Okay. So when you applied the 25, was he already escalated?
Yes.
Did you ever get a chance to do it prior?
We probably did this about 3 or 4 times. So the latter 2, yes. Like I watched the dog come, and then when it was maybe like 20 meters away, I nicked him with it. And so he did his thing where like he shoved his head behind my legs. And then when the dog came, he just completely avoided it.
Okay. So the best approach is always getting the remote in prior to the explosion. Okay. So when he's already having the moment of reactivity, one, in some cases the dog will have to be, you have to be super high on the collar to cut through that reactive moment. Or 2, it'll be worth it to the dog to blow up and gamble 127 hit just to blow up. Okay, and people are like, why would they do that? That doesn't make sense. It's a dog. Okay, so if I can catch it prior and like learning the threshold where it's like, yeah, when the dog is in this window, I see when he's about to blow up. So if his ears perked up, boom, that's when I would tap. Okay. At the 25.
Leave it up at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're doing is you're putting a harsher consequence, which isn't even that harsh. It's 9 levels higher than 16. Is he goes, I can't even think about being reactive without their consequence coming. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But if you catch it during reactivity, in some cases the dog will find that rewarding enough, and you're constantly having to stop him, as opposed to getting him to just cut it out completely. What you may start to see if you do that approach of the preemptive task is when he sees the dog, he'll see them and just naturally move himself and like turn away. We don't do anything. Okay, so I mentioned like not hiding from things, right?
Yeah.
That's for you. But if he decides to do it, I let it go because it's either conflict or avoidance. And if he opts for avoidance, I go fine. So he learns an option. Okay, so over time, if we're trying to really press the dog, then I might move to there's no more avoidance. There's just deal with it. But it depends on the case. Okay, in most cases they will naturally progress where the dog learns like, oh, I don't need to avoid, and I don't need to blow up, like nothing ever happens, like we're good, and they'll just take it themselves. In other cases, the owner will have to force the dog to accept facing this way while the stimulus passes, and then they get better that way. Okay, so every case is different, but that's all fine.
Cool.
Anything else?
No, we did not do a lot with, I know like the last 10 minutes last time we learned stay.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, I wasn't too worried about that. I'm more worried about the heel stuff.
Yeah.
Stay is super easy to practice.
The one thing, he picks up on the left turn very quickly. I have to really accent when I'm going to turn. So it's like a drastic slowdown. I'm hanging on my left leg in order to get into it.
Take a look.
Heel. Might be like while walking too, just he's observing other things.
Sure.
That was this week. I did have to do like the turnaround just to kind of check him back into this place.
Okay.
Because even on the 16th, you told me all the way to it up to like the 16th.
Okay.
He was still, I would say, it was more like 10 minutes.
Oh wow, yeah.
So it's a lot of me like doing the turn.
Was he turning with you?
Yes.
Okay. So then what I'll do there is for sure bump it, because that's why he's playing that boundary. But then I would tap prior to the turn. So some dogs learn to play with that, where they're like, I'm turning with you, right? They'll learn to forge ahead, but still catch the turn early enough that technically they get to avoid the remote. So if I blast them first before I turn, it's like try to beat that, right? And then I would go probably about 20, 22-ish, bump it up a bit. So whenever you're correcting something, if you don't see a change within 3 corrections, so for instance, turn, 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 I bump it. Okay? So I have either my 3-tap rule, which is if I go tap, 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 no response, I bump it. Or I have my 3 correction rule, which is turn, 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 then I bump it. And then once you hit the right number, he's going to be like he is right now. Okay? So when we get dogs that perform better here, the reason is because I probably told the owner at some point during the lesson, jack it up. Right? So the dog learns to recognize when Jesse's here and we're doing these exercises, the collar goes higher. So when the owner leaves and they're struggling with something, I'll ask them like, well, did you go higher? And they're like, no, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, no, you always go higher, especially at this point, okay? He has a very good concept of what heel is. The environment was just overwhelming and you hadn't reached the number to make him respect for the command. And it's almost always about power, okay? And you just keep jacking it up. And eventually it'd probably be maybe 25, and all of a sudden, oh, now you remember where you're supposed to be, okay? Especially in new environments, okay? Anything else? Okay. Did we talk about a long leash last time?
We did not.
Okay. Do you want to work on recall, which is come when called?
Yes.
Okay. Do you happen to have a long leash at home?
I do. It's 20 feet. It's
A flexi?
No, it's one of those, it's like a 20-foot.
Polypropylene line or something like that? Okay, cool. If you can get a second leash to clip to that, 30 feet is a fairly realistic length. Otherwise, 20 feet is fine. But we should have one with us today. And we can start working on that. Recall tends to take people the longest to learn. Because it requires you to go somewhere to practice. Okay, somewhere where you have space.
Yeah, it's that. It's one of those.
Yeah. All right. Oh, that dog was watching right there. All right. Slack. So I'm going to show you a couple of things here. One is whenever we use a long line, I suggest that you lock the leash. So doing that handle loop to your thumb. Okay. This is just in case if he decides to hook it. The worst he's going to do is yank your arm, as opposed to like holding it like this, where it feeds through. You're going to get rope hurt. Okay. When you reel in the leash, I think the way I do it is I have the remote here, and the leash like this, and I can just feed it back.
Got it.
Right. And then the next thing I do is when the dog arrives, I just do this to lock the leash again. In case he decides to book it or something, again, he's not going to feed this through my hand and get rope hurt. That's the main concern. Okay. let's go ahead. We're going to keep that leash on him.
Okay.
And I suggest removing the poop bag holder because it's going to be dragging and stuff, so we don't break that.
And then that's quick.
So you'll clip this actually to his the ring. Yeah, so he's going to have 2 leashes on. Good. I'm going to give you this one, and I'm going to take the red one, and we're going to go off here in this grassy area. Go. Go. Good. We'll just have to watch for off-leash dogs.
There's a couple to the right. The burner.
They're stepping on the boxer and stuff.
The boxer left. The burner's still there.
Oh yeah, I think they're stepping on the leash, so we'll keep an eye on that. I'll have you pause right there, and I'm gonna move back this way. So, what's your number right now?
16.
16. Let me have you go down to 12. And what you're gonna do here is we're not gonna worry about come rate. Okay. We want to teach him that remote means now to return. So what you're gonna do is start to pull back the leash. You feel the tension right there? Right? So that tension is on the collar now. So he feels a very light tug going that way. Is you're gonna apply a tiny bit of pressure and you're gonna start remoting, okay? And then you're gonna see him probably buck around a bit. But once he starts to move towards you, you're gonna start walking backwards.
Remoting or he's coming to me.
And then you would stop remoting. Okay? So you start moving backwards, but you stop remoting. Okay?
Understood.
We have a couple of off-leash dogs here. So wait a second. Hi. Call your dog, please.
We got dog training, we got soccer training out there.
Thank you. Yeah. Good. Back tap. Tap. Good. Good. Leash. Put a pause right there. And praise. Boy.
Good boy.
There we go. Good. And break.
Break.
Good.
Break.
Good. Repeat that a few more times. Let's go to 14. And I'll have you angle out a little bit to your right there so you don't not hit that tree. Okay, when you're ready, a little bit of pressure. Tap, 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 and back. Good. And wait right there. And raise. Good.
Break.
3 more. Break, break, break. Right? Good. Tap, tap, back, tap, tap. Good, right there. Good. Tap. So if he jumps on you, what you do is just pull back, remote until he removes. No off and stuff. Just jump on me.
Got it.
Okay.
That 14.
Right. Good. Pause right there. Praise. Good, we're gonna do one more. And a boy. We go to independence at least.
We can double check.
Tap, back, tap, tap, back. There you go. Good. Now go ahead and keep your leash how you have it. Just say heel and walk this way.
Heel.
Slow stop. Good. So, we're going to review what just happened. So we're not worried about the word come, but we're trying to teach them there's another answer for them. So dogs learn things as they change. So even though the sensation of the contraction doesn't change, other than the intensity or the level of it, he interprets what it means according to what life looks like. Makes sense?
Okay.
So if you're walking in heel, you're here, right? So if you come to a stop and he's standing, he's like, feel the tap, it's this, right? Or if you're ahead of him, you tap him, he comes here. Now, he's all the way up here. So tap now means return. So even if he couldn't hear you, after you've done this training, if you remote him, chance are he's going to run you. He's going to assume you. Okay? So I want to make sure that the remote is what's making Gilmore turn you. So like, let's say you did call him and he ran straight to you. But the remote did nothing. Right? So then when I need to use the remote, like people assume it would just transfer. But if anything, it'll deflect the dog. Right? So we always want to shape things using the pressure to use the dogs, never deflect, always to, heel, turn, or sit her down, whatever it is. So we have to always reshape things using remote power. Okay? So we use that leash pressure to direct them, hey bud, you gotta come this way, right? So then when you did that tapping and you started looking around and there was one who kept running to me, right? So in some cases the dog thinks the faster I get to someone, the faster it stops.
So it's not associated with the person. Me specifically.
Right.
Just remembers.
Who's everything nearby, right? So like let's say he's off leash and maybe you're with Maddie and you're here and Maddie is there and Gilmore is past Maddie. If you call him, you're probably gonna run Maddie. Okay, because he's thinking the faster I get to someone, the faster it's going to go. Okay, so he's not doing anything bad. If that ever happens, I just tell my clients reissue the recall. Because technically to the dog, they think they can do it. Because he's thinking just go to somebody, right? So then it's like, all right, because if you keep promoting him, I can guarantee you he's going to start jumping and finding that person. And he's like, how close do I have to get? And you saw a little bit of that here, right? When it's jumping around, so I had to remove myself to make it easier for you.
So when you say reissues, so I'm verbalizing.
Come. Yeah, and we'll talk about how we layer that in. And then if you have someone that can help you, like practicing leading another person, it makes life a lot easier. Okay. Worst case scenario is if he runs to Maddie and he's not done that yet, then I just walk over to the person and then grab my dog. Okay, because I guarantee you keep promoting him, he's gonna jump all over them. Okay. So we use a bit of tension first, then we apply the remote to get him to return. Now we're gonna flip it. Okay, now we're gonna do remote first, and then add in the pressure if he doesn't figure it out. Okay, so your leash is gonna stay slack down. We're not saying anything still, you're gonna start remoting. He might buck around, he might run to me. You'll see me remove myself, right? And at some point, he should just turn and move to you. You would then continue with this, like you were, okay? If he looks too confused, I'll tell you to prematurely back up so that tension will kick in and help him after the fact. So we're just flipping the thing around, okay? Questions?
No. While, to try and get him to come to me, eye contact, I would assume. Like, I should be looking at the dogs.
Oh, yes. So right now, or always, you will always be facing Gilmore, but moving away from Gilmore. Okay, so like let's say he runs to you and he goes off that way. You would turn to face him, but now you'd be moving this way. If Gilmore passes you up, you would pivot. Now you're facing him, promoting, now you're moving this way. So always facing, but moving away from. The reason why this is important is visual cues, right? So if Gilmore's out of earshot and you remote him, he can't hear you, but he sees this, that's his visual cue of you need to return to me. Okay? So I do this to this day with my dogs. You will always see me issue the command and do at least 3 steps back before coming to a stop. Okay? Other questions? Is that a tripod? Oh, he's missing a phone. Any other questions?
No. Oh my God. I'm remoting, and then he should be responding to the collar that he doesn't get it initially.
Alright, we can flip directions and go like this.
Julie, that is really so helpful. Thank you. Okay, go. Wow. You literally got
Back 1, 2, good.
good.
Great.
Good.
Beautiful. Ready, 4 more.
Break.
Break. Come on, buddy.
Okay, coming.
Yep. Good.
Good boy. Good boy.
Break.
Break.
Good. 3 more. I just realized you're 3 for 3 for off-leash dogs. Every class has been an off-leash dog.
There has been.
Come here, buddy.
I did not
What are you
even. I
doing?
didn't click it.
That's my net. He's already picking up the pattern. So now you can see why we have the second leash, right? So the second leash is so that we can force the disconnect.
Okay.
And avoid. So what you can do here is when you do the first tap, go ahead and say tap.
Do it.
Say it, yeah. Whenever you're gonna do it, say tap so I know when to let go.
Okay. Tap.
Back, 1, 2, 3.
Good boy. Good boy.
Good. Do 2 more.
Break.
Or bud. Come on. Yeah, boy. Tiny.
Tap. Should I put it up?
Good.
Good boy.
And last one. We'll give him a break. Break. Come on, bud.
My God, that is so cute.
Good boy.
Now here. Leave your leash how it is. Heel forward.
Deal.
Slow stop. Beautiful. Okay. So now we're reversing things. So you see how it's taking a little bit longer, right?
Yeah.
A dog's first instinct is typically to back off or to hug into like whoever's
When
with them.
he feels.
Correct. So now you're teaching them not to do that, to start responding to you, to start thinking of you,
Okay.
right? So you've seen that little pup like 5 times. So now we're gonna start layering in the verbal cue. Okay. So everything stays the same as the second one, but now we have the cue prior. I typically say the dog's name, like Gilmore, come, and then everything falls immediately after. If Gilmore responds to the verbal cue, you would still at least give 1 tap. Okay?
No.
No pull. Right. So we're doing Gilmore come, tap, 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 right? leash if he looks confused, but trying to get him to respond to the remote. Okay? He moves towards you, you move back, boy, I'm gonna stop. Crazy.
And I don't, so like right now how he's kind of overshooting, but then he's coming back.
He's coming in.
My legs, it's fine.
Yeah, it's nothing terrible. Like we get dogs who go, and they'll come back around. So he's actually doing pretty good. Now I do not care where he lands. Left, right, front, back, between my legs. What I want is immediate space, okay? If Gilmore were to land here, you would not walk over and say, boy, okay? Because you're doing half the work. If he landed there, I face him, start remoting, and moving backwards, okay? Make him close that gap. The reason is, he'll end up doing, like, he's gonna stop, but then you're off again. So you always want to do your immediate space. Calling back, tapping, questions about any of that stuff?
No.
All right, so let's go ahead and start. We'll start moving work. So break. Come here, bud. No. And a boy.
Gilmore, come.
Back. One. There you go. So here, let's try this. Take a couple steps back. Tap. Good. Now wait there. Good. Okay. And he moved pretty quick there. And break. And you got to tap in for that after the call.
He started to head my way.
Yes. And I'll explain why we do that. But even if he starts running towards you super quick, you still want to get at least one tap in.
Okay. Gilmore, come.
Yes.
Good. Break.
More.
Break. Gilmore,
Back. 1, 2, 3. That's good.
good boy.
Do 2 more.
So if he's, so like that one, right? I didn't even say come, I just said stand me at my way. Should I just keep moving backwards?
Just 3 steps. So if that's all happening, I just do this as force of habit because in most cases when people call their dogs, they're stationary. So they'll get the dog's attention and the dog will like, what? So when they see you moving, it draws them to you, okay? So yeah, you call them and then you see that movement, you just assume at least 2 to 3 steps back. You know, and if you're delayed on the movement back, like you find, it's just at least getting a 2 to 3 step back on. Okay?
And if he's anticipating it before it comes to me, that's okay, right? Like if I'm saying Gilmore and he's running my way.
Yes, because it's technically right. So he's thinking the moment mom says something, run, right? And I really like, especially I think it was the first one where you said Gilmore and he just flipped 180 and he shot forward. Yes. Okay. Because when you're calling him, or when you need him to respond, you're wanting that type of response. Because if he's chasing after something, the only way you're going to break through is if it's ingrained in him 180. Okay. If there's any delay, then you're risking your dog getting lost in that moment. Okay. 2 more. Break. Everybody, break. And a boy.
Gilmore, come.
Good. 1 more.
Break. Break. Gilmore, come.
Beautiful.
Go.
And then relax and heel.
Heel.
Very good. So we're gonna review all that stuff. So that jumpiness that you're seeing, you know why that is? Yeah, right. So he's under stress. He's like, oh shit, it's gonna happen, right? We see this a lot with anxious nervous dogs, is that they're getting edgy. This is not realistic, right? Like, we're doing this to teach the foundation of the recall, but you wouldn't, like in real life, nobody would be holding Gilmore for you to call him, right? Like he'd be chasing a squirrel, running around with dogs or whatever, is that he's gonna be doing something else. So because this is very much a fixed situation, he's learning and going, shit, every time Jesse walks away, mom calls me and remote habit. And he's wanting to beat the punch, right? So he's getting the exercise, he's just getting a little bit worked up because of that, right? But when you start applying this realistically, that goes away. Because no one's gonna be holding him, okay?
So to practice this week, I take the lead that I have, and even if, so like we have a fenced in backyard, if it's just like practicing the stay as well with the lead, is that more realistic?
If you're gonna be practicing the stay with the, I would say yes, you need the leash, because you need something to maneuver him.
Yeah.
If you're gonna practice your recall, you don't need your leash. You would have him equipped, I'd let him be free in the yard, and then randomly, maybe 10 minutes in, Gilmore come. However, I would expect he's going to try more options because now he's able to. But you can force it to happen without risking him running away. Okay, so there's stages to this. So we went from short leash to long leash, then it goes to long leash dragging, to long leash enclosed area, or long leash dragging enclosed area, to no leash enclosed area. Okay, before we're unenclosed. Because, so earlier when I mentioned calling Gilmore and always tapping despite the fact that he responded, okay? So if I'm Gilmore and you call me, right? He's returning and you tap now, what do you think would happen?
He would start freaking out in that moment.
And do maybe what?
Run the other way.
Yes. Right? So you want to think you commanded something, he responded, but you were too late. So then he goes, shit, maybe that was the wrong thing. So deflects him. So what we're doing is, I'm trying to force that issue while he's on the long leash. So every time you call him, if you remote him and he goes, what? And he goes the wrong way, I'm not worried, we're just gonna go. I can keep him under pressure and make him return. So then he goes, oh, no matter when mom gives that cue, or the tap with the cue, I always return. Okay? So, and I do this for weeks. Right? Every time I call him, Gilmore, come tap, right? And I might even play with the number a bit, put him under a bit more pressure to force him to panic. So I can go, nope, wrong decision, get your butt over here, okay? Because that's what's gonna make it realistic. Because whenever a client has had to use high power to get their dog to return, it's in an emergency situation, right? So if you've already worked through it in a controlled context, you're gonna have a much higher level of success of getting them to return. But also you knowing how do you fix that issue. Because most people, when they see the dog run off, will like kind of like, what do I do? Or they run for the leash, okay? Because they're so used to that. And I'm trying to program you to always jump to your remote and trust your tool as opposed to trying to get physical control, okay? Questions about any of that stuff?
No, makes sense.
Then I had you do a couple of heels, right? And no, your leash was completely slack. Like right now you had 25 feet worth of slack, but Gilmore's right here. Right? So the methods that we're using are off-leash methods. So if you want to start progressing your obedience, you start that now. Okay? So this is exactly how we do it. We pop the dog on a long leash. So if I say heel, and let's say Gilmore goes, I don't know what to do, I'm gonna run that way, he can now, as one client put it, he is now a 30-foot mistake line. Right? And I'm holding on to one end, I keep walking and remoting, get over here, right? And he hits the end of the leash and goes, crap, this isn't working. He sees you walking away, he's like, maybe I run to mom's side. He catches up, everything stops. He's like, oh. So now you're
like even walking him now, do it with the 21 that I have?
If you have space, like in the neighborhood, then you want to think like, oh crap, he has 30 feet of reactivity line, right? So like let's say like when you were gone for like 3 days, right, and you have nice open space, my thing is always use the long leash just in case. Until you start to see, I like to see the mistakes happen so that I know I've already worked through them.
I got it.
Okay?
Yep.
And I might even do stuff where I make mistakes happen. So the hardest turn for a dog is usually the away turn, opposite. So if the dog's on our right side, then turning this way is hard for them. And if the dog's on our left side, turning this way is hard for them. Because you leave the peripheral range immediately.
Okay, which makes sense why that was the one who was delayed.
Struggling with that. So since I'm trying to force a mistake, it's not about fair or unfair. It's about I'm trying to make an opportunity happen so I can remote him to fix the issue. Okay? So if I just turn off like this as we're walking and I start remoting and he's over there going, holy crap, what do I do? And I just keep walking and like figure it out. And then he does, right? Because he's not going to run away. I have him on the leash. That's what tightens up everything and makes it more reliable. Okay? So if he does make a mistake off leash, I know we've already worked through it. Okay? So when you have the ability to, you can. Like let's say you came here and it was like a quiet morning or something, you could shorten the leash maybe half, so it's 15 foot of slack, and you're just walking through, but you're being mindful of your environment. So I've had plenty of clients whose dogs are reactive, and they're off-leash trained. So what they would do is, they'd go to the park and they would pick their spot, and they're not worried about their dog taking off or anything, but if they ever saw someone coming in with their dog, they'd leash them up, let that happen, and then once they were in the clear, and they would go back to whatever
And
they
that
were
is
doing.
just like, that's forever going to be a thing. Like,
Depends on the owner, dog and owner, right? Every case is different. If I have a really confident owner, the main thing is like if something happens, people panic, right? So if I have a really confident owner about like I'm gonna get the dog under control, it's like sure, right? But then there's the other half of like being respectful and like just responsible. I've had some dogs where they had a really, how would you say, confident owner, and the owner's like, I want to make this dog walk past dogs, right? Like it's gonna happen, and I'll see the dog, I'm like, it's not gonna happen. Like that dog is so bad, like you have to step aside, right? And I'll let them try it, and then I'll come in, I'll say like, you know what? I suggest that I know you don't like it, and I applaud you for wanting to push it, but your dog is just not gonna work. Step aside, right? Make the dog's life a little bit easier, right? And then that's perfectly fine. I get other owners that progress through all this stuff, and even to the point where the dog's social. Then I go, great, but it's hard to say. I always tell people, err on the side of caution, in my opinion, and also go with what you're comfortable with. I've had people say, I would never let my dog go off leash, and then I see them a year later and the dog's off leash. It just took them a year to develop that confidence. There is no rule or law that says you have to build your dog to a certain degree. Okay. The main things I care about is if things go south, do I have control? Can I get my dog back? Can I get him back under control? Can I stop a situation? And if I have all that stuff, but I know the dog won't ever tolerate a dog running to them, then I'm going to be cautious and mindful of, if I see something about to happen, I want to prevent worst case scenario. And that's how I go about stuff. Okay? Questions so far with any of this?
No.
Let me think here. So how do you think we could take this exercise? Okay. And let's say you're working with a friend, same exact setup. How could you make it more realistic?
Realistic as like there's going to be distractions.
Distractions, or like when do you think you would actually apply the recall?
In a setting like this. So if there's something that he would want to chase after, for example, like a squirrel.
Sure.
I would try it then because now he has to make the choice between me and the collar and then whatever it is that was
distracting him, right? So if there's a squirrel involved, he's most likely going to be doing what?
Looking / attempting to chase.
Okay. Or chase, right? So what's his motion in comparison to you?
Motion, meaning,
What way is he moving?
away from depending where the squirrel is, but not me. It's
Yes,
not me.
right?
It's wherever the
True
squirrel
enough.
is. Yeah.
So how can we replicate that with someone?
If that person has like a treat or something like that,
Treat,
is that what you're saying?
right?
So like something that entices him to stay, or at least distract him to stay with the other person.
You could do that, or they grab the leash and they start running away from you.
Okay.
Right? So you're recreating the running away part,
Okay.
right? So when people call their dogs, they're typically chasing something, running towards something they shouldn't, or in motion, but almost always away from them, okay? So obviously, like I said earlier, this is not realistic. So if I come into a setting, maybe it's very bland, and it's like, oh crap, there's no squirrels today, and you have your friend, it's like, how could we still make this useful to myself, right? The other person grabs the leash, come on, Gilmore, and starts running away with him,
Okay.
and then you practice clearing that. Does that make sense?
So would it be about this span of distance here, and I'm just staying stationary, waiting for the leash to kind of tighten?
Prior, right? So ideally, we want the recall to happen prior. So like, let's say, I have Gilmore, I start running, and you have like 50 foot of slack.
Yeah.
Like I call him here,
Got it.
right? So that the person can keep going, and what should happen is he goes, that's what should happen. What usually happens is the dog keeps running with the person and even cuts in because they might be thinking heel.
Okay.
Right.
And then he feels this, now he's gonna, okay.
Yes, right. So then, as I practice that, at some point I run with Gilmore and you call him, and before any tension or any confusion, boom. Right? So now he's turning as he's moving away from you.
Okay.
So we're trying to create, again, a more realistic scenario with what we have.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to practicing solo, so he has prey drive, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there like a park with squirrels and stuff by you?
Yeah.
I use that to my advantage.
Okay.
I take Gilmore, we go to the park, I put the long leash, flip another leash if I want a longer leash, break, right? And start to meander and like walk towards the tree with squirrels, right? So if that tree has squirrels, I'm like, all right, break, bud. I want to make sure that I'm within the feet of the leash so that the dog doesn't pop me along, and I let him be a dog.
Okay.
Barking, jumping, chasing, all that stuff, right? The longer he does that, the more disconnected he gets from you,
Okay.
okay? So then I let him get real deep into that chase. Maybe 2 minutes in, Gilmore come, pop, 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 get him to return to you, okay? He comes back, I'll wait a moment, because some dogs want to go back.
Yeah.
So then I'll test them, right? I called you, your job is to stay with me. They try to attempt to sneak off, start remoting, moving away, bring them back, right? Wait again, a few seconds go by, break, go back at it, right? So I'm using it as both a distraction and a reward.
Okay.
Okay,
But
so
like the first times, like let him get deep into it.
Oh, yeah.
Let him go jump that tree.
the longer they do that stuff, the more like you're out of the. I liken it to like kids playing video games.
Yeah.
When the parent will tell them to do something, like okay, and they completely they hear it, but they just completely dismiss it, right?
Yeah.
Same thing for dogs.
Okay.
He's in that predatory state. He's chasing, he's having a good time, and he hears you, but he's like, this is just so much
Right.
fun.
Right.
Remote kicks in, it's like you need to get your butt over here.
And so I should be playing with, or like dialing up rather
may have
than
to.
relying on control.
Right. So I would start first with remote and start moving back, and tension may kick in, right? And you might need it a few times to just kind of get in his head, like, hey, when you're doing something, I might call you.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're teaching him. So like, I had a client, her dog was staring at a squirrel, and she was sitting, and we were over here. We're behind the dog. And I said, tell your dog down. But was still on the squirrel, okay? And she's like, oh my God, that's crazy. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, with remote, you've made a place for yourself in your dog's brain that even if they're doing something else, they'll hear you and still respond. And we're wanting the same thing, but with recall,
Okay.
okay? We do want to be mindful that we don't drill this out too much when you're solo, because then he'll get paranoid and not want to leave you. So we already saw a little bit of that, right? When I started walking away, and he's like, no, 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 because he knows what's going to happen. But with another person, you can force it, that disconnect. And then I would hold them, and I was like, wait, let them settle. And then I was like, okay, now you can do your recall, right? So when I go to the park, I might go for 30 minutes, and they leave the dog alone, right? I'm still holding the leash, but I let the dog be a dog. And at the very end, I'll do one recall, leash him up, heel, right? And then the next day, I might do like 3 recalls in the span of 30 minutes. And the next day 2, the next day 5, the next day 1, then 1, then 1, then 5, then 2, right? I'm randomizing how many times I'm calling the dog so they don't get paranoid, okay? Now, in some cases, and I think you might see that with Gilmore, because...
So the predictability is what makes it. So if he can pick up on the pattern, that's what,
Yeah. So I'm trying to avoid that pattern. I'm trying to make it as organic as possible. And that's why recall takes so long.
Okay.
Because the paranoia is actually good in the sense that that's what prevents Gilmore from running away.
Yeah.
Okay? So like some dogs, the owner will take off the leash and they're just gone, right? And that's bad to me because if they're just so comfortable leaving the owner for one thing, they'll leave him for another thing, right? But if I take the leash off and the dog doesn't move, that's what prevents him from taking off chasing something. Okay, is that kind of like, is something going to happen here, right? But then you got to create that looseness and that comfort of like, hey, bud, you can't play, but I might call you. As long as you return to me, we're good. Enjoy everything that you want to enjoy, but I might need you to come back, right? So if you do see that paranoia and he doesn't give you the opportunity to do recall, then your exercise becomes going to the park, popping him on a long leash, and just meandering for 30 minutes.
Okay. And don't even work on the recall.
Yeah, just leave it alone, right? And then one day you're going to see him just shift, and he's going to be really loose about it and very comfortable. I don't do recall, okay? Because he's just getting comfortable. I do that a few more times, and then maybe after 6 times, I'll go do a recall. He comes back, boy, break, and hopefully he goes right back at it, and I'll leave him alone, right? And then if I need him back, I might just drag him back to me, or walk up to him and put him in a heel, right? And then the next day, so I'm slowly reincorporating the recall to fix that problem, okay? So every dog's different. I think Gilmore's going to be more on the side of like getting attached to you. So don't try to use sound to deflect them, because that actually makes dogs stick more. So people are like, come on, break, go play, go chase the squirrel, right? They do all this stuff, and the dogs are like getting closer and closer. I just go break, and I just forget about the dog, okay? And I just mind my business. If he keeps walking by your side, he's default heeling. So then what I will do is just like turn around and just kind of like walk, like make no sense to the dog, and then pass by trees purposely and stuff to get him distracted. Then I'll pause over here, you know, just like ignore him, just completely disengage, so that he's like, oh, like I can be 20 feet away from mom and not have to worry about remote. Okay? Questions about any of this stuff?
No? Makes sense. Would you say this week that's kind of what we're focusing on?
Yeah. Always keeping things on the leash. In the yard, if you wanted to like jump a little bit, you could. But let's say you call Gilmore in the yard and he decides to run, maybe you're in the yard, but he runs to the back door. That's not recall. Recall's here. You would have to use power to make him return, right? So let's say you have to go to like 95 before he goes, forget the back door, I'm running to mom now. You're gonna have a very high level of paranoia now, you know? So my main thing is if I cannot reinforce it or make it happen, I stay away from it, okay? So if I have a dog that's in the beginning stages of recall and I take him to the dog park and I already know, like if I call this dog, they're not gonna come, right? Instead of calling him, I just walk over and grab him, leash him up, and walk out. The dog doesn't know the difference. The problem is when people call their dog ignores them, and then they go to leash him up. So a dog learns, oh, I don't have to return to you, and you'll do the work. Does that make sense? And I'm trying to condition every time I call you, you always come back to me.
So if I were to call, if he doesn't respond, would I then give it like another 5-10 minutes of him just playing, and then I would go up and leash him?
I'd make it happen. You know, technically, right? If you call him and he ignores it, I'd give a little bit of space and then go grab him and leash him up so it doesn't get tied too much together. But ideally, anytime you give a command, you always want to make it happen. And that's what makes things for him more concrete, because dogs are all about consistency. So if I tell a dog to sit and I don't have a remote collar, I know I can make him sit by going like this, physically, right? So I can always reinforce it. So even though it's not the same consequence, the dog just thinks every time I hear sit, I have to do this, always, right? Or Jesse makes me do it. Same thing for the recall, right? So if I don't have the remote, but I have a long leash, I might, call them if they don't come towards me, I'd pop them on the leash towards me, right? But ideally, everything's always remote. Okay. Other questions?
No, that makes sense.
So we'll do a couple more recalls. Now we're going to change it up a bit. I'm going to do a couple of me running away. Right, so this is a 30-foot leash. So when you see Gilmore hitting about 10 to 15 feet, that's when you want to issue the recall. When you start remoting, expect that he's going to keep running with me, okay? Keep remoting and start moving back. At some point, the tension's going to kick in and whip him around.
Gilmore come one time, so don't keep saying come if he's not coming.
Yeah, the remote makes him complete the task. Okay?
I stay stationary.
Yep. Here. What's your number? 18. All right.
Gilmore, come.
Right.
Good boy. Good boy. Great.
So at the end, right, because tension did kick in, he did the 180, but it was too late. We're trying to get that 180 right when they're in when you announce it the first time as he's moving with me. Okay.
Gilmore, come. Good boy.
Let's try going to 22.
Is the timing okay?
Yes.
Like okay.
Because you're doing it and I'm still able to get distance. He's just, it's not sinking in quite yet. Okay. Everybody, ready? Yeah.
Gilmore, come. Good boy.
Good. So I know he felt that because I heard him kind of grunt.
Great.
So I'm hoping with a couple more he should 180 once you cue it. Everybody. Here. Remember you.
Gilmore, come.
Now I don't know if you saw that. He shot towards me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's still, you know, but this is all normal stuff.
Okay. Leave it at 22. Break.
Let's try 22 again. Okay. Remember, bud. Remember you. Yeah.
Gilmore, come.
A little bit better.
So if he anticipates like that, don't. Okay.
Yeah, I kept him because you didn't call anything yet, right?
Yeah.
So it should be like, you know, Gilmore's running away, and once you cue it, boom, he
Okay.
just turns.
Okay.
So he has the ability to.
Okay.
He's just doing it once he feels the leash,
Yeah.
and we're trying to get him to do it when he feels the remote.
Okay.
Okay? So we'll try 2 more times,
Okay.
and we'll probably cap it there for this guy.
So he's right now. What he's doing is he knows the remote's coming, and he's just trying to avoid it.
Yes, because again, it's context, right?
So
he
it
knows
doesn't mean that he's actually processing the.
he's trying to avoid it.
Okay.
Okay. Oop, careful. Come on, bud.
Gilmore, come.
There we go. There we go.
Good boy.
That was before the leash kicked in. That's what I'm wanting.
Okay.
One more.
Right.
Come on, bud. I know. This exercise sucks. I know.
Gilmore, come.
Yep.
He went full.
Yeah, I know. But the second to last one is the goal, right? He again shot towards me, right? That's why we do these exercises
Okay.
to override his natural instinct of like you're closer, right? So anybody that can help practice with this stuff. The other thing, like let's say the running away is no problem, right? Then I go to playing and moving around, where we're going back and forth as opposed to just directly away.
Okay.
So start changing it up.
Okay.
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 So you're trying to recreate what would happen in a realistic context, and you're setting the foundation.
Okay.
Okay. Now, let's say you go with Maddie to hang out with Rudder, right? And they're playing, and you want to practice recall in that setting. Now it's harder because now there's another dog or distraction involved. So in my book, when we make one thing harder, we make another thing easier. So instead of calling them from 30 feet, I'd actually move him closer and call him at about 6 to 8 feet. That makes sense? So he'd be about here. They're playing Gilmore come this close, okay? Or closer if you want. Because it's gonna be a lot easier for him to disengage from another dog when you're that close than if you're 30 feet away, okay? And then we gradually build it. And once he learns the concept of whipping around and returning to you, you progress fairly quickly. Okay, it's just a matter of getting a few successes in a row. Then it's like, awesome, you got it. And then we can build it to a more realistic context. Okay? So this does take the longest to teach.
Makes sense.
there's no rush on things. You know, like I said, if he looks a little bit too paranoid, take your time, let him get comfortable first. You know, use squirrels and stuff to your advantage. If he's still being wary, I just reel him in instead of just remoting him in a recall. Let him get comfortable, and then once you see it, and you'll know, like he'll once you say break, he'll not care.
Yeah.
Then I go, great, we're over that hump. Now I'm gonna start practicing some recall stuff. Okay. Questions about any of that? In terms of the long leash heel stuff, everything stays the same. Your leg movements, your pivots, your crossovers, everything stays the same. But now he has the capacity to get up to 30 feet away from you. Okay? So I'm gonna have you do real quick before we end the session is you're gonna stay heel and you're gonna move around, turn and pivot and all that stuff, but you're gonna leave your leash slack how you have it. Okay? Go ahead.
Then leave it on 22.
You can go down to 16, 18.
Okay. Same concept.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, one last thing. Let the left hand go. Step over, it's on his face there. Step over the leash so it's behind you.
Just leave it in my right
Like
hand?
that, yeah. So what we're doing here is with the leash in your right hand, the loop goes back this way. If it's on the inside, he sees that. And we're trying to remove the visual of a leash. So when you're walking with them with that red leash, it acts as a line of connection. So I've had dogs be perfect with the leash, and the owner drops it, the dog goes, I don't know what to do, because they don't see that leash anymore. So you're kind of recreating no leash, but there technically is. It's just okay. Whenever you're ready. Yep. Good pivot. Good. Now try this. Why don't you let your right hand go? Everything stays the same. Okay.
Heel. Heel.
Right. Yep. Good. Okay. So you've been practicing this since day one. The only thing that changes is the leash.
Excellent.
Okay. So that was just to give you a glimpse of the progression.
Okay.
So if you're practicing yourself and you have the ability to go to a park and do long leash stuff, is I do that for a week, and again, forcing mistakes, doing that immediate right turn, right, with the leash in your hand, because I'm expecting he's going to get confused. So I can remote him to return, right?
Okay.
Once I've done that a number of times and I can't trick him anymore, then I go to leash dragging, right? Now, if I need to correct the dog, I will always make sure that I know where the leash is, so that if the dog keeps going that way, I can step on the leash here, remote them until they come back, and then I can move forward, okay? Until you get to the point where you don't need anything. You know, then tennis courts are a great place to practice, especially during the winter. Nobody plays tennis in the winter. And a lot of my clients will go there and work their dogs off leash within the tennis court, so they're not worried about is the dog going to take off, okay? And then so they get to the point where I can take my dog anywhere, leash not necessary. Okay?
When walking him, should I always kind of have the leash behind me, moving
Oh, with the
forward?
right leash? Oh, with the red leash?
Yeah.
You can keep it like you normally have it,
Okay.
you know? So I think control-wise, it might get a little awkward. So having a cross move is fine, but when you have the long leash and you're doing recalls, and we stack things. Like once we teach heel, stay, and recall, we practice all that within the session, right? So I could do a heel, come to a stop, stay, walk around, but now I can get up 30 feet away, come back, break, throw something for the dog to chase, keep throwing the ball, do a recall, dog comes back, do a stay, walk away, come back, go into a heel. We start to use them interchangeably to start teaching the dog how to do things without needing a visual guide. Okay? But for you, in terms of homework, recalls when you can, and then long leash stuff if you want, whenever you have the capacity to, you can practice that as well. Okay? With your stays, go back to short leash, right? You have to build that up. And then if you incorporate it here, you wouldn't say stay and then walk 30 feet away.
Right.
You'd say stay, warm him up, be close, and then start to get more distance, keeping that leash in your hand.
So the couple times that we did practice it this week, his butt was down, but he was definitely looking at other things, and if something had caught his attention, I know his butt would not be down. So should I get him, is there any way to get him in the habit of, when he's staying, is he supposed to be looking at me, or is it okay if he...
No. So what happens is, let's say he's in a stay, and something grabs his attention. I'd let it go, but let's say he then gets up, and I correct him for that. He puts his butt back down, right?
Okay.
What that's ultimately teaching him is hey, when you're in this position, you can look at stuff, but you can't move with those consequences. I know a lot of trainers really focus on the look at me stuff. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
So earlier, the dog that I mentioned was staring at a squirrel. We sat down, plop. Right? We had no eye contact. We were completely behind the dog. That's the control that I'm wanting. People stress, visual. I stress mental. Okay?
Cool.
So if he's in a stand, he's looking around, just be ready for the mistake to happen so that you can correct it. In the beginning, after a few corrections, you may see more focus on you, right? But eventually the dog goes, oh, I don't need to be staring at mom the whole time. I just need to not move, okay? And then he'll take in the environment, just minding his business, and then, release him, okay? And it's free again. Do not do a recall from mistake. Okay? Because it'll create a problem. Because every time you walk away, he's going to assume you're going to call him, kind of like what you assumed here. So avoid that, because then you're making more work for yourself, because then you have to fix that. Okay? Either have someone help you, or take them to a place where there's distractions and use that to your advantage. But never do recall from stay, because one, it's not realistic, but also you can undo the stay, because he's thinking at some point I'm going to move. Okay? Anything else?
No? Perfect.
Awesome. Oh yeah. So next class, there's another part to it. I got it. Thank you. We'll go over the second half of recall. For the reactivity, being preemptive, trying to correct anything that you might think is going to lead to a blow up, and see how that works for him. Otherwise, 25 to shut down full-blown reactivity is actually pretty good in my book. I've had to go pretty high for some dogs. Okay. Yeah, we'll see you in a week. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Thank you.